right. So welcome. My name is Scott Morin. I'm with Bytown Ventures, boutique consultancy, leadership development, go-to-market, and a system called the entrepreneurial operating. There's someone that is not on mute. I'm just going to mute everyone here. 1 second. Okay, so I just muted everyone. So hopefully, Mark, you know when you're going to jump in, so you can unmute yourself when that's occurring. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about leadership development and specifically teamwork, team building. And what I want to do is I want to walk you through an agenda, and then I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some concepts that are going to be foundational to team building. I'm just going to check my waiting room. Got some people entering. So the agenda for the next hour is as follows. So we'll be doing some introductions. We're going to be spending some time, just a little bit of time, speaking to Patrick Lencioni's novel, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I mentioned this in a quick promotional video last week. Just do a couple of excerpts from this book. I think it's a great book. If you haven't read it, give it a read. It's structured in a business fable type format. So kind of a different way that you would read a book, but it's a fictional business fable. But there's some great concepts that I want to touch upon. They're going to be introducing our guest, Mark Gasparotto, and he's going to be speaking about some experiential learning offerings that they provide at Gasparotto Group. And then we'll have some Q&A and some discussion at the end. So that's our agenda for today. And just in terms of an introduction, there's a fair amount of folks that are on the phone and on the Zoom today that are familiar with me, but I'll just introduce myself to you. So my name is Scott Morin. I'm the principal consultant at a company called Bytown Ventures. And prior to founding this consultancy, I spent about 25 years in the high technology space here in Ottawa. And throughout that tenure, I was very lucky and very proud to be a part of 6 exits with positive outcomes. So a positive outcome, it really depends on how you would look at that, but did the shareholders make money? Did the employees retain their jobs, that type of thing? But some fantastic experiences. But also important to note, went through some very humbling times as well. So an asset sale and also there was a period in my career where I was told my services were no longer required. So I try and bring all of these things to bear when I'm working with companies and helping companies. And recently, I've decided to double down on something called the entrepreneurial operating system. So I am what's known as a professional EOS implementer. And this webinar is not about EOS, but the quick summary on EOS is it's a system, it's an operating system for organizations. It enables execution. And we touch on 3 areas when we're working with companies. So we touch on vision. We want to make sure that the founder, the CEO, has a clear vision of where they're going. And then everyone on the senior leadership team not only has that same vision, but has an understanding of how you're going to get to where you're going. Traction. So we teach a meeting cadence. It's a weekly level 10 meeting that has 90-day goals associated with it. And then healthy is just all about ensuring that the senior leadership team really enjoys working with each other, because quite frankly, a lot of organizations have a little bit of dysfunction. And so we spend quite a bit of time on that. And that's really where, that's what inspired today's webinar, which is the concept of healthy, the concept of having a leadership team that really has vulnerability-based trust across the group, so that they're able to share information and able to work better together. So that's what inspired today's webinar. My guest today is a gentleman by the name of Mark Gasparotto, and I'm going to read out his bio. It's a fantastic one, and I hope you don't mind, Mark, but here we go. So Mark is a former military officer and is the president of Gasparotto Group, a boutique consultancy that provides clients with practical leadership solutions. During his 2 decades of military service, Mark served in key leadership roles in international hotspots such as Bosnia, Afghanistan, and Haiti. From commanding small tactical units to overseeing large multinational peacekeeping operations, his emphasis is on results, teamwork, and effective communications. Mark leverages his strategic and tactical leadership approach to help private and public sector organizations increase their members' leadership and resilience, strengthen their teams, enhance their organizational culture, and expand their influence. An accomplished Tech Canada speaker, Mark combines rich personal experience with applicable theories and current trends to deliver practical, achievable outcomes, whatever the leadership challenge. So that's Mark. And Mark, you're going to get into some of your content a little bit later, but did you want to say hi to the group?
Well, wonderful to be here. Scott and I have just started collaborating and really enjoy the insights that he brings. And we've had some great conversations, and that's what really sparked this idea to share those conversations and those insights with you today.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. And you'll all get to know Mark a little bit better a little bit later on in the presentation. But I want to ground it a little bit by talking about this book. And before I do that, we're going to do something a little interactive just to get people's juices flowing. So I'd like you to go to a website. If you're online right now, I'd like you to go to a website. It's www.menti.com. And I'd like you to enter the code 22273290. And I'm going to put that in the chat as well. So bear with me 1 second. I'm going to put that in the chat. So it's www.menti.com. And it's 22273290. So go there, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second, and I'm going to move. Okay, so we've got our first poll question is annual planning is around the corner. We're going to blow off a little steam by, and then I've got some options here for you. So go ahead and just choose your selection if you're so inclined. This is an anonymous poll. All right. So most of the participants have put in their answer. And, you know, I'm glad to see that at the very least, you're going to be getting together for the most part. There are some safety concerns, and rightly so. But there's nothing that beats, you know, getting the team together, even if it's just over a beer or over dinner as you wrap up a quarterly session or an annual planning session. So nice to see that. And then, of course, what we're going to be talking about today is taking that to the next level. So some options for you if you really want to take that to the next level. So that's one question for you. Now I'm going to ask you another question. Actually, it's just give me an answer. And this is what's known as a word cloud. So bear with me a second. When I think about team building, I think, and I'd like you to give me a one-word answer or a short statement. What do you think? I like the agony. That's a good one. All right, so there might be some answers coming in still, but for those of you that haven't done a word cloud before, essentially the largest word is the word that's been answered the most often. So it looks like collaboration has been answered more than once. It looks like trust has been answered more than once. There's a lot of really positive attributes associated with team building, which is great. There's also potentially some negative attributes like agony and all the time and effort required to plan it. But suffice to say, of course, a bit of a leading question. I'm of the opinion that team building is a really important thing, and trust is something that we're going to be talking about today. So thank you for participating in that. I'm just going to go back to my presentation here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And I'm a big Jocko Willink fan, and in Jocko's podcast, if you're not familiar with Jocko, he has a book that's called Extreme Ownership, and he has a number of podcasts where he actually reads from books, usually military history books, but great books nonetheless. And I'm going to read a couple of excerpts from the 5 dysfunctions of a team for you, just sort of to set the stage. So this is how the book starts. Not finance, not strategy, not technology. It is teamwork that remains the ultimate competitive advantage, both because it is so powerful and so rare. A friend of mine, the founder of a company that grew to $1 billion in annual revenue, best expressed the power of teamwork when he once told me, if you could get all the people in an organization rowing in the same direction, you could dominate any industry in any market against any competition, anytime. Whenever I repeat that adage to a group of leaders, they immediately nod their heads, but in a desperate sort of way. They seem to grasp the truth of it while simultaneously surrendering to the possibility or the impossibility of actually making it happen. And that is where the rarity of teamwork comes into play. For all the attention that it has received over the years from scholars, coaches, teachers, the media, teamwork is as elusive as it has ever been within most organizations. The fact remains that teams, because they are made up of imperfect human beings, are inherently dysfunctional. So I just wanted to share that with you. It's in some ways it's common sense, but in other ways it's very illuminating, right? It confirms some things that we've been thinking. And while I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the book today, what Lencioni talks about is he talks about the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and then he provides the corollary, which is what are the functions that you want. And it's very similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so what he does is he walks you through a number of different things that sort of get you to the pinnacle where you're executing and you're providing results that everyone wants at the team level. And at the very base of this model is something we call trust. And trust is something that is you can only earn trust. Trust is not bestowed. And so he spends a fair amount of time talking about trust. I am going to read one additional thing from the book before we move on. But vulnerability-based trust is something that is rare, but there's some really simple exercises that you can put your team through. Maybe not even go so far as to what Mark's going to talk about. Some very simple exercises. And I do 2 exercises with teams when I'm doing some EOS implementation. Number 1 is just, let's start this meeting off and share something about yourself that no one in this room knows. And that is on a scale of 1 to 10 from a vulnerability perspective, it's about a 1 out of 10, but you would be surprised, at some of the things that get shared and some of the bonds that get created with that simple little share at the beginning of a meeting. Here's something that's about a 3 out of 10. And it's just answering, 5 very simple questions. Here are the questions. What's your hometown? How many kids do you have in your family? Did you have any interesting childhood hobbies? What's your biggest challenge growing up? And then what was your first job? And so by sharing that information, I've actually done this with companies. That information can be very revealing, even though it's a 3 out of 10. And I actually had a senior executive share one of their challenges with the team that led to some tears. But I'll tell you, it brought the team a lot closer together. And so those are just some really simple vulnerability-based trust exercises that you can go through. And with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take it to the next level, though, and I'd like to introduce you to Mark and get him talking about some of his offerings. But before I do that, I just want to sort of provide one really quick anecdote. And I know there's some people on this call that were part of this experience for me. So one of the reasons why I think team building is so important is there was a time in my career where I was a pretty cocky, half decent sales leader. And I was under the mistaken impression that really most things were about me and what I could do. And I will never forget heading out to, it was a very simple 2-3 day getaway with the executive team at Fastlane Technologies. And over the period of about 24 to 36 hours, I saw my team coming together, and they sent me a note at the end of the night after quite a few cocktails. They sent me a note. They slid it underneath my door just as I was heading to go to sleep. And the note had a little poem or a limerick on it. And it was when I read that note that I realized that it wasn't about me anymore. It was about the team. It was about my team, and it was about the company that we were helping represent. And if I can short circuit, or if we as leaders can short circuit that, because that took about 2 years to get to that point. If we can short circuit that in any way, then let's try and do that. And with that, that's my sort of lead into to Mark. And Mark, I'm going to hand the conch over to you.
Hey, Scott, thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, just let me take you through about a dozen slides to give you a sense of how I approach leadership development. And then there'll be some examples of what that looks like in terms of programs. And it's quite different. And so no doubt that will spark lots of questions during the Q&A period. So one of my programs is called Outside the Wire. And that's let's go back, Scott. And it's a military-inspired leadership development program, but we also use this as a metaphor for taking people outside of their comfort zones. Real growth happens when people are not comfortable, but we want to create a space that is psychologically safe. So this is where the vulnerability comes in. So it's not comfortable, and yet at the same time, it's physically and psychologically safe. So people have a safe space to learn, to experiment, and to fail. And we do that by taking people into a novel environment where the hierarchy doesn't matter. The letters after your name don't matter. And so when everyone is faced with a challenge that they've never seen before, they have to come together in a way that's different than how they would approach this at work, where technical skills may play a part. And this actually allows people to be vulnerable, and they feel comfortable being vulnerable because there aren't the same expectations on them in this different environment. So Outside the Wire is a metaphor for being uncomfortable yet psychologically safe, and that underpins all the experiential learning programs that I offer. Next, please. So my approach, or the approach that I use, is founded upon the experiential learning cycle. And Scott, if you could just build it completely. And so this cycle, some may call this adult learning or action learning, and it involves having an experience. And the key to that experience is being present in the moment, so you can take it all in as best you can. And then reflecting upon that. So here, whether you call it an after action review or retrospective or postmortem, but just going through the act of reflection So as objectively as possible, trying to figure out what was going on. And then tying it to theory. And I know a lot of people don't like the theoretical portions of development, but really theory is important, because if you're going to apply learning from one context to another, understanding the fundamentals of what was going on, that framework or that theory is important. And the other thing here with theory is it doesn't have to be something academic. We all have theory. It just means something that's written down. So our marketing material at work, our website, our customer databases, our procedures, that's all theory. Those are all things that can be updated based on an experience you may have using it. And lastly, experimentation. So this could be research and development. This could be a pilot project, or this could be a training venue, something like what I do. So the key to this cycle is to do all four elements of it. Most people have a bias. So if you're a creative type, you're biased towards experience and reflection. That's how you learn. If you're a scientist, then you do reflection and theory. If you're an engineer, you do theory and experimentation. And if you're an executive or an operator, you tend to be experiment and experience. So most people don't do all four elements. Most organizations don't do all four based on their culture. But the key to making learning sticky, and this is what I learned in 20 years as an Army officer, but also doing a master's of leadership, and now the work that I do in the business arena. The key to making learning sticky and the key to really getting that return on investment is to ensure that you do all four of those things. So this segues into the graphic you now see on the right-hand side, courtesy of a company called Training Industries. And here they've updated the numbers of the 70-20-10 model, which was a framework that was developed in the 1980s, which said 70% of professional learning occurs on the job. 20% is socially, so that could be a coaching arrangement or around the water cooler, and only 10% was learned in formal training. So these numbers have been updated based on some more recent research. And for employees now, it's at 56% on the job, 25 social, and 19 formal. And for executives, it's a different ratio again. So Scott just build that. So for executives, it's about 40, 30, 30. So what this data tells me, actually go back, please. What this data tells me is for leadership development programs to be sticky, for them to work, for them to get, or for you as a sponsor to get true return on investment, you need to ensure that it transcends that barrier between the formal classroom and what goes on the job. So what I've tried to do is, with these two frameworks, build that into how I deliver leadership development. And so you as either leadership development professionals or as business owners or executives who have a program at work, how are you ensuring that you're getting the best bang for the dollar? How are you ensuring that the learning that's going on occurs not just in the classroom, but that can be translated to on the job? So that provides the fundamental framework for how I approach development. Next. To lead others effectively starts with leading yourself. And that may seem like a fairly obvious statement. However, most leaders don't spend the time on developing what I call your inner game. So that leadership of self. And that requires you to know yourself. And that's a journey, that journey of self-awareness. So a lot of what we do with folks, yes, it's in a team context, but what does that mean to them individually? How are they going to grow as a person, both in their personal lives and also their professional lives? Next. trust is the #1 determinant of team effectiveness. So I'm not saying this just because Scott showed Lencioni and that first layer of his model. The research is very clear on this, whether it's academics, best-selling books like Stephen Covey's, whether it's Google, who have, well, they have the data on their own workforces and their high-performance teams. And when they did the research, it came down to trust. And certainly my own experiences putting together teams to fight on some pretty crazy battlefields around the world, this is what we relied on. And this is what we really had at the end of the day. And this is what made us highly successful. So it's that trust. And trust, the research is also clear on this, what precedes trust is vulnerability. It's not the other way around. And so, you know, vulnerability loops where one person demonstrates a bit of vulnerability, the other person has to acknowledge that and then reciprocate. And then that first person acknowledges it. And then that loop is formed. And vulnerability could be as easy or as simple as saying, I don't know. It could be saying, I was wrong. It could be saying, I need help, right? Those are very simple ways of telling someone else that you don't have it all figured out and you need them. And then when that loop starts, and then it just continues and continues to build. And we can get into more on that during the Q&A. So some secret sauce, and it's not that secret. This is what armies have been doing since time immemorial to build teams. But when a group of individuals goes through the same experience, and the more challenging the experience, the better, those bonds of trust are formed, those bonds of human connection. So when I look at this photo, and this is a photo of some of my soldiers, we were in Kandahar, it was 2006, during Operation Medusa, which was Canada's largest combat operation since the Korean War. And it was fighting nonstop, and so we were clearing compounds of Taliban insurgents. So when I look at my soldiers here, they're resting between these assaults on these compounds. And even as they're resting, they are shoulder to shoulder, the same way that they would have fought. These men and women have the bonds of brotherhood and sisterhood, bonds that exist to this day because they were united in purpose. They overcame common challenges. They suffered together. And now that is what creates the greatest team. So I try to replicate that, taking away all of that kind of risk. But I try to replicate those scenarios which really accelerate the forming of trust throughout the stages of evolution of a team: forming, storming, norming, and performing, if you know Tuckman's model. So what does that look like for a corporate team? So Scott's gonna play the next slide, which has a video.
Okay, so I'm gonna hit play on the video, Mark, that's good?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Vulnerability is strength. Vulnerability takes courage. When you are willing to be vulnerable, there will be pain, but very little can actually hurt you.
I think some of the best parts here is when we're having those in-class conversations where each person is forced to apply the theory that we learned, apply it to themselves, and then be a little bit vulnerable, because that's where the golden nuggets are.
Courage or comfort, the choice is yours.
And
Okay.
next slide, please. So I'll now describe what the phases of my program are for a full program. And I just want you to keep in mind the slide I showed you previously about that experiential learning cycle, and then the percentages of where people learn from formal to social to on the job. So a full outside the wire program is 8 weeks. Okay, and that's phases 1 through 4, as you see in front of you. And then some companies hire me for a year-long coaching program afterwards. And it starts with registration. But during that time, we also do a baseline team assessment. So I will come to you on site, and we'll use Human Synergistics. They're a global leadership development company with many assessments, and we'll do a survival simulation. And then you'll do a team assessment after, and you'll rank yourself based on how well you solved the problem and how well you collaborated together. And we do that before we do any other training, so we have that baseline, and we'll repeat that assessment in the field exercise. So anyway, that is phase 1. And for longer programs like this full program, we'll also do a medical assessment, confidential with the doctor that we collaborate with. Next is online learning. So if you think back to that cycle of theory, this is where people are going to ingest and digest the theory of leadership, the theory of team building, the theory of learning, etc. And we partner with Fanshawe College, and soon all of our curriculum will be available online through their learning portal. That's the online learning. And at the end of that online learning, what's really important is the intentions for development. So across all of those domains of theory, people need to come up with, what do they want to work on? What's the one thing for emotional intelligence, resilience, learning, perhaps accountability that they want to work on? And they make that explicit. So they let their coach or facilitator know, and then in the field exercise, they'll also share that with their peers. And then this online learning, if your company already has a leadership development program, we don't make you duplicate the effort. We'll learn what you do, and we'll just ensure that those intentions for development, those reflective questions, apply to the program that you're already taking. And then phase 3 is a field exercise. We tend to do 3 days and 3 nights. Anyone can come to the field for 1 day and 1 night and get through it. What we want to do is we want to introduce scarcity. We live in a world of abundance. We have abundance of choice. We have abundance of food. We have an abundance of pretty much anything we want. But when you introduce scarcity, the team individuals now need to come together and work together as a team in order to overcome those challenges and to still accomplish the mission despite having a scarcity of resources, perhaps. So that field exercise, this is where if you look at that video or that video we showed, there's the military skills. If the military thing is not what you want or is completely off brand, or the price point is too high because it's expensive to roll armor, and it's expensive now to shoot and to find tactical venues that have rappel towers and Humvees with off-roading, etc. We can take you into the backcountry, and so it's really just the wilderness and camping and canoeing that becomes the classroom to do the things we want to do. That's the field exercise. And then phase 4 is the debrief. This is where there's a one-on-one session between the coach and the participant, and then a group session. And that's meant to help people take what they've learned, receive that feedback, and figure out how they're going to use that learning on the job, right? So contextualizing things for their environment. And then some clients then hire us to coach after, where we really help them take what they've learned and apply it to problems specific to those people. And in fact, we may even go inside their wire, is the term we use, where my team now comes and may help do business continuity planning or strategic planning, or helping you solve a particular problem in your environment. So that's what the full program looks like, and it incorporates all elements of experiential learning, and it also meets people. It takes them outside the wire to a novel environment, then also comes inside their wire to help them on problems specific to their environment. Next, please. So the programs, as I've already mentioned, a couple of them. So outside the wire, military inspired in terms of the activities that occur. Backcountry leadership is wilderness inspired. And for those who want a glamping experience, we partner with Fanshawe College to run their reboot. But the core of all of those programs are trust building activities, problems, very hands-on problems that force people to collaborate, to gain consensus. And consensus is a great thing. You don't always want consensus, but when you're dealing with complexity and ambiguity, which most of our problems involve, the group answer is more often better than any individual answer. So how you have those people coming together and being heard and offering suggestions and then solving the problem that way, it takes more time, it takes more patience, but most often it's a much better result. So that gives you a very, very quick and high level overview of how I approach development, especially through the lens of experiential learning.
Good stuff, Mark. And I want to take a step back here and just go back up to Lencioni's pyramid just for a second, and want to sort of speak to again why this foundational element of trust is important. You actually want, and I know most of you on this webinar know this, but I'm just going to point it out. Although some of you may shy away from this, you actually want conflict within your organization. You want really good conversations with differing opinions, and if those differing opinions come together and a decision is made for the better of the organization that takes these two differing opinions that are actively voiced into consideration, that's going to be the right decision for your organization. That conflict can only occur with trust. So if you have a bunch of conflict within your organization that is not trust-based, you know, anecdotally, like people rolling their eyes, sarcasm, you know, people talking behind other people's backs, people talking about personalities, not issues, that's no good, right? But if you have a trust-based foundation, you're going to want to encourage, and you're going to want to get that conflict going, right? You're going to want to have those discussions in the boardrooms where you hash out, you know, moving left or moving right or going forward, that type of thing. So I wanted to go back and revisit that because, again, going back earlier in my career, I remember observing as a young professional, observing a couple of executives disagreeing with each other, and voices were raised. And I remember it rattled me a little bit, but then I realized after the fact that these people really did trust each other, and they were just passionate. You know, it's that classic sales versus marketing, or CEO versus business development. And as long as there's trust, you do want those. I mean, obviously you can't raise your voice too loud, but you do want to have those good conversations. So I just wanted to go back and revisit that. Lencioni does talk about it in his book, and I'm just going to read something that's really kind of powerful. And again, this is done as a fable. He talks, basically about a business unit. So this person is saying, if we don't trust one another, then we aren't going to engage in open, constructive ideological conflict, and we'll just continue to preserve a sense of artificial harmony. Nick challenged, but we seem to have plenty of conflict and not a lot of harmony, I might add. Catherine shook her head. No, you have tension, but there is almost no constructive conflict. Passive, sarcastic comments are not the kind of conflict I'm talking about. But why is harmony a problem? It's the lack of conflict that's a problem. Harmony itself is good, I suppose, if it comes as a result of working through issues constantly and cycling through conflict. But if it comes only as a result of people holding back their opinions and honest concerns, then it's a bad thing. I'd trade that false kind of harmony any day for a team's willingness to argue effectively about an issue and then walk away with no collateral damage.
Yes.
So anyways, I just wanted to share that with you. And what I want to do now is I want to move forward and have a quick conversation with Mark. I've got some questions for him. And then I also want to open up the floor for some discussion, but we'll get a little fireside chat going. And here's some questions for you, Mark. We didn't rehearse this, but I did write these down in advance. So Mark, here, question for you on, it can be outside of the wire, it could be your Algonquin canoe trip, but is there ever been an example of a breakthrough that you've observed, amongst a management team or amongst a group of individuals in one of your activities?
Yeah, I'll tell a story through the eyes of a woman named Adriana, and she works for a company called 44 North Digital Marketing out of London, Ontario. And 44 North has been to 3 outside the wires. They keep coming back, and in fact, they're one of the companies that hires us to coach them throughout. So Adriana was in her early 20s when she first came, graphics designer, really struggled with confidence. Personally and professionally, she was very creative and artistic, but would often get overruled or would often not speak up. Well, Adriana was afraid of heights. And so rappelling was something she told herself she couldn't do. And rappelling is one of the activities that we do during Outside the Wire. And we encouraged her, right? We're not about coercion. We don't yell at anyone, but we just encourage for people to try things that are uncomfortable. And so she tried it, and she took that leap of faith. And when she got to the bottom, I mean, the smile on her face was indicative of that experience. But she then realized, and this is through the help of the coach as well, that was a self-imposed constraint. That was an obstacle that she had put in her way. That was a story that she had told herself. And then it led to, well, what else is possible? What other obstacles can be climbed over or removed from her path that she had put there? And so she had a personal transformation. And that led to a massive change in how she showed up professionally at work. And then when you extend that to 44 North, the owner was telling me they took the train home after 3 days in the field, and he thought they would sleep the whole way back because it's physically challenging. And they talked the entire time, and when they got off the train, they all hugged each other. And he'd never seen that behavior before. And it was in that moment that he knew these were no longer just a collection of individuals, but they had gelled into a team because of that personal trust. They still needed to work through the professional things at work, but personally now they saw each other as humans, and they trusted. So that's a transformation that I'm quite proud of.
Good stuff. All right. Well, thanks for that. I have another question here, and then I'd like to open it up. Just in terms of getting the entire management team together, right? So ideal scenario, you've got, if it's a smaller organization, maybe they all go to an event like this. If it's a subset, trying to get the entire management team together. What are your thoughts on that? Should an organization delay if they can't get everyone together? Is there a way to sort of accommodate it if you've got part of a team? What are your thoughts there?
So yes, these events are best if it's an intact team, or if it's a team drawn from across the organization because the sponsor wants to get collaboration between business units, right? Like reinforce those bonds, not just in a hierarchical sense, but lateral as well. So I've seen both. I've seen the CEO take part, and I've seen the CEO just observe. And there, I would recommend the CEO sleeps in the same tent that everyone else does, and not go to the hotel. So he or she chews the same dirt, is the expression we use, as his or her people. But what we're seeing now with COVID in particular is teams are not coming 100%. Some aren't. And so we're starting to develop ways of incorporating them. Either they'll do something, a virtual problem solving around that, say, that survival simulation I think I mentioned, or what we want to eventually get to, think of a war movie or a spy movie where you've got people on the ground, and then you've got people back at the command post, the intelligence fusion center, the people seeing the feeds from the drones or from the folks on the front line. And so we want to be able to create almost a dual tracked exercise where people who can't deploy to the field for whatever reason can still log in virtually, connect with that virtual team and support the folks in the field. And so we're experimenting with what that can look like. So there is complete inclusion, although there'll be a different experience. There's still a common purpose around why all those folks are coming together, whether in the field or in a virtual environment.
Okay, good stuff. Yeah, we're going to be living in a hybrid world moving after this, right? So
yes,
it makes sense to do it with some of your events. We've got about 8 minutes left, and I do have a couple other quick questions, but
okay.
But I do want to open it up. If anyone does have a question, they can send it through on the chat. I'll read it out, or they can just unmute themselves and ask the question. If we have multiple people unmuting at the same time, maybe chat's the way to go. So I'm just going to give it a second here. And while we're waiting for questions to come through, I'll ask you some of the logistical questions, right? So what time of year and how often do you run these types of sessions?
It's best May to October, although we can do winter. I only run one open serial of Outside the Wire a year because it's a massive undertaking. The other ones are smaller, so people may not have either the money or the time for an 8-week program. So they may only want a day. And so a leadership retreat could be a day, or they may only have half a day, in which case we would come to you. We wouldn't do any of the military stuff, but we do all those trust building activities. And you saw examples of some of them in that video. And so we just did some in Calgary about a month ago, just in a park. And so there are activities, people are blindfolded sometimes, so there's sensory deprivation, which just increases the requirement for trust. Think of things like an obstacle course or very hands-on problem solving things. So we can do those for one client at a location of their choosing, and that takes a lot less logistics. So we see a variety of ways to do it, and it's all customizable as well, based on the specific objectives that a client may have.
I've seen some social media posts from you. You've done a couple of Algonquin Park canoe trips, haven't you, recently?
Yes.
Yeah. What were those all about?
Well, the latest one we did was for a military charity called True Patriot Love, where they funded 6 veterans and 6 frontline healthcare workers to go and reconnect with nature. So the objective there really wasn't around leadership. It was around, well, loosely mental health, but more about a reset and a break. And then there was also a canoe qualification involved. So again, the objective was set out by the sponsor, and then we will tailor the experience to meet that objective.
Good stuff. I got a question that's come in here, and it's I'll just read it out here. Hi, Mark, Scott. Combat troops are facing actual life and death situations daily. How do you replicate that obvious motivating force into the corporate scenario, specifically the need for trust and the willingness to be vulnerable?
So I've been in a couple of gunfights. I've been blown up. Nothing scares me more than actually making payroll. So that may seem strange or crazy, but it's what are you used to? And in the Army, I just never. We don't have to make the money we spend. We just spend money. So I'm faced with challenges now as a business owner and an entrepreneur that I wasn't faced with in combat. I think building a team is the same. So do you share a common purpose? And is that purpose greater than just making money? So like, why do you come together as an organization? Because people want to belong to something greater than themselves, or they are motivated, truly motivated, when that's a part of it. Yes, you need to take care of the money part of it, so they can pay the mortgage and feed their family. So that doesn't change. The parallels between what we do in the military and what we do in business, while the risks may be different, the approaches are very similar. So how I build a team now is very similar to how I built a team in the Army. I don't yell. I want people to understand why. So I spend a lot of time explaining that. I spend a lot of time gathering that input. I'm only command and control when I need to be in an acute crisis. Otherwise, I'm very collaborative because trying to solve complex problems in complexity. Short question, long answer. So not sure if I answered it.
No, that's good. I mean, and I used to think that way too, right? Like, well, you can just issue orders, right, in the military. But again, listening to Jocko, he talks about, when he was in Iraq, he'd be talking to his troops, and it wasn't that simple. He would have to explain why they were going to do something a certain way, right? And business is very similar. You got to rally the folks around the common purpose and what you're looking to achieve. So yeah, no, definitely get that.
Let me give you an example. Is there another question?
There's just a comment, but go ahead and make your example and we'll move on to the comment.
So when I was a commander, when we were brainstorming around how to solve a problem, I would speak last. Yes, I may issue an intent, but I would speak last, so I didn't prejudice any of the answers that came out, because I did want a divergence of opinion before we converged. But when I would do an after action review, I would speak first, and I would start with all of my mistakes. And that was meant to allow people to own their part of the plan, both positive and negative, and to speak freely. So those are examples of how and I didn't really know it at the time, but how I was demonstrating vulnerability to provide that safe space for to get that marketplace of ideas. And there's a great passage from Stan McChrystal's book. His first one is his autobiography, and I replicated that when I was a commanding officer. And in it, I was having a discussion with one of my subordinates, and there was a private discussion, and he disagreed with an approach that I was taking, and he convinced me that his way was better. So I said, okay, we're going to do that. But actually, what I want you to do tomorrow at the orders group is to publicly challenge me. So we're going to replay this private conversation in public. And I'm going to say, that's a better idea. We're going to go with that. And we did that. And what that was meant to do was to demonstrate to the assembled crowd, all subordinate to me, that it was okay to challenge. In fact, it was highly encouraged to challenge. If you believe so strongly in something and it's value added to trying to solve a complex problem, and that's the culture that I wanted. I wanted that healthy conflict, and having also read Lencioni's book, so that was a practical way for me to encourage it.
Okay, good stuff. I'm just going to flip to this final slide just so people can get your email address, but I just want to go to the chat for a second here. Rochelle, I believe you had a comment.
Yeah, I come from a similar space as Mark, and that I actually facilitate outdoor experiences, and we work with families generally, but we've actually been having businesses come to us unsolicited, asking for assistance doing stuff outdoor with their staff. And just to mention sort of a couple of things, one is I'm a bit puzzled as to why some of these teams haven't been meeting outdoors of their own volition, because it's been so clearly desperately needed by these teams to be face to face, to be together physically. And so, I mean, I would just urge people, even if you don't you don't pay for an expensive retreat, to go to a local park with your team where where the public health authorities have said that you could safely meet. And that, sort of and the other thing is just being in nature, especially if you can find sort of a more biodiverse area to be in. I know the work we do is about nature connection. And so that just the mental health place that folks are in right now is really critical in some teams and is affecting business. And that in itself, and requiring no professional facilitation, is incredibly good for people's mental health and for collective mental health and mutual support amongst teams. And just, in the few experiences we've had facilitating, using a nature therapy methodology. But what's been striking to me, not that we sort of have these sort of big moving experiences that the individuals go through, and these experiences, it's been that the team leaders at the end of both experiences, like the bosses, they have been the ones that have been, with tears flowing down their face at the end, because they've been so moved about actually being able to care for their team and take care of their team and be with their team, right? And so it's not just about supporting the underlings, but the bosses, right?
The bosses get something from it, for sure.
Massively, right? Because they've been the ones who've been providing the informal mental health support as things go on. They've been the ones who haven't been able to help, right? They just haven't been able to. So for them, that's actually, to me, been kind of one of the most striking things, has been that it allows them to feel like they can do something useful and be there for their people. And so I would sort of say that that's probably, equally as important as helping kind of the other members of the team.
Good stuff. Thanks, Rochelle. So I'm going to wrap things up now. And my last little comment is, what I'm saying. So when I do an EOS implementation, once we get through the actual training, we move on to quarterlies. So we get together once a quarter, and then often there's an annual planning session as well. And what I'm suggesting to all the companies I'm working with right now is we should be making every effort we can to get together. It's way too easy to say that we're going to do this over Zoom, because we've been doing this over the last 18 months over Zoom. And you've got all the sort of infrastructure set up, but there's no replacement for getting together, and there's no replacement even if it's just a simple dinner or a beer afterwards. There's no replacement for that. So again, sounds kind of obvious, but I just wanted to sort of stress that and close things off by saying, thank you, Mark. Appreciate your time. Thank you for your service, by the way, to this country. If anyone has any questions, there are our email addresses. Connect with us on LinkedIn, and think about, it might even, who knows, be a little too late. I'll let Mark comment on that if that's not the case for this year. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to put the bug in your ear for next year. What are you doing at the senior leadership team level? Can you do something special next year that really brings the team together? That type of thing. Mark, did you want to just make a quick comment on availability of your offsites?
Planning is going on for next year. There was some hesitation, based on reopening. So some people are still, or some clients are still waiting. If we're only doing it for your organization, it's not an open course. We usually need a couple of months to secure the venue and bring in the experts. Even going into Algonquin Park requires reserving of sites. So it's more along the getting the venue, but we can also react pretty quickly if we're just going to a local park, for example, and doing those trust building stuff. So because we customize most of our offerings, it really is just get in touch and let's chat about the objectives and your constraints, and we build something from there.
Okay, Good stuff. All right. Well, thank you all. I'm going to stop this share, and I'm going to stop the recording. This will be available for you after the fact. I'll get it out on the website, on my YouTube channel, and great seeing some familiar names and faces, some folks that I haven't talked to in a little while. And Mark, thanks again for your participation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers.